Welcome, everyone, to another Domo Lunch and Learn. These are our community lunch and learns that we put on every Tuesday and Thursday as we have great content and content creators that come to our doorstep and say, I've got a great idea. And Andrea is always one of those folks that always has great ideas and has produced some great content for us here on these Domo Lunch and Learns. This session called Don't Be Afraid of the Big Bad CLI Tool. Domo's Java CLI tool is extremely intimidating. And whenever that happens, we bring in that way someone like Andrea to the Domo Lunch and Learns to describe all things unintimidating. So I'm really excited about this session. She's going to go over the basics of using the CLI tool, get comfortable with it, how it works, and then what you can do with it, and share some resources for those folks that are just now kind of scratching the surface on what this Java CLI tool can do. Andrea, thanks again. Andrea is our Domo manager, data pipeline architecture here at Domo. Thank you so much for joining the live stream again, on demand, always.
Thanks, Eddie. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to intro you to this tool today. I've had a lot of customers talk about how intimidated they are by the concept of using the CLI tool. So this will be a pretty straightforward beginner level session. If what you're here for is a deep dive into the tool or some of the more cool or interesting things you can do, that might be a future session. This session is for those who want to get their feet wet, who want to understand how it can be used. So I will go ahead and share my screen. All right, excellent. And I'm going to be sharing my whole desktop today because I'm going to be hopping around between different windows and different applications. But basically, I want to give you what is hopefully an unintimidating introduction to the CLI so that you feel comfortable and confident downloading the file and using it yourself and trying it out. So we're going to start out by talking about what the CLI tool even is, where you can get it, why you might want to use it. So talking about, what is the CLI tool? So first off, CLI stands for Command Line Interface, and it basically is just a lightweight Java utility that acts as a wrapper for some of Domo's APIs. Now, these are not necessarily the APIs that are documented in our developer website. These are APIs that are used by various internal folks, or a lot of different customers use them. And this tool is operated from the command line. And that is where people get kind of scared, but that's okay. We'll walk through it together. You'll feel comfortable by the time we're done here today. So where can you get the utility? It is here in your Domo instance in the admin section. So I'll show you how to get there. So this is my sandbox. I go to my sandbox. I go to more admin. I want to go down here to more and tool downloads. And then the Domo CLI is right here in this section on the right hand lower side. When you click this button to try the Domo CLI, it will download the latest version of the jar file, which is a Java file, and that's basically the CLI. You don't have to necessarily install anything, although you do need to make sure that you have Java 7 or later installed on your computer. You should be able to see how to do that if you go, and kind of Google, how to install Java 7, or you can check your Java version, that kind of thing. Kind of out of the scope of today's conversation. But so once you have that downloaded, you have the CLI tool on your computer, on your local machine. So one note here, you'll want to move that jar file to a folder where you can open it from the command line later. So you'll want to move it somewhere that you will know where it is and you can find it again. This is probably not necessarily best practice, but I have mine just saved in a folder in my documents directory because it's very easy for me to get to there. We'll go into more use cases later, but specifically, just kind of a high-level overview of why you might want to use the CLI tool. When I'm thinking about the CLI tool, I'm thinking about it in a few different pillars. So number one, I'm thinking about it from the perspective of data management, being able to upload large data sets, export or query data, updating schemas, that kind of a thing in the data management realm. You can also do some instance management from it. You can do some management of pages and cards. You can manage users. Um, there's a kind of a battery of different things that you can do with the CLI. And then also, I think, of course, because of my role, I mostly think about the CLI from the perspective of setting up data pipelines, connecting to data, various source systems, setting up partitioned or setting an upsert key or something along those lines. Those things are more advanced. We could potentially do a session in the future to go into more of those advanced topics. But for now, just know that the CLI can help you manage both your data and various things about your instance. Okay, so step one, the first thing we need to do is confront the command line. I have literally had multiple customers tell me that if they have to use the command line, they're not doing it, or when they look at the command line, their mind goes blank. I'm going to be honest, I have a degree, a technical degree. I have been working in the field of data for, 15 years or so, and I still feel like a super hardcore hacker when I'm using the command line. So maybe instead of thinking about it as being intimidating, you can think about it as being like a super hardcore hacker, like from that old movie from the 90s, Hackers or whatever. Okay, so opening the terminal, I use a Mac. I'm sorry for any of you Windows people. Um, in order to get to the terminal in a Mac, I just use like the Apple and space key and I search for terminal and I open my terminal like that. Um, I think it's a little bit different on Windows. I think it's called, oh, I can't even remember what it's called. It's been a minute since I used a Windows machine, but I think you can open the run and then get to the CMD or command line. You can also look that up online. So here I am. I'm in the command line. I'm in the terminal. How do I open the the tool? So I've noted here in the presentation, you enter Java dash jar and then the path to the CLI. I use it so often. It's here in my most recently used commands. I pressed up to get it into my commands. My CLI file is just stored here under Documents in CLI. So when I hit Enter, I am opening or accessing that CLI tool. So basically at this point, when you have opened this in the command line, you are no longer in the classic command line. Um, if you are used to Unix development, if you are used to using Linux from a command line or something like that, it's not going to behave in the same way as it would if you were using that. So using commands to change the directory or things like that are not going to work within the CLI. So, getting started here, uh, I guess maybe the first thing to note is that in order to get back out of the CLI, you just type quit or exit and it will dump you back out of the tool. So that's how you get back out of it if you need to get back into your file directory or if you need to do anything else in your command line that's not within the CLI. When you open the CLI, one thing you'll notice is that I'm going to make this bigger. Okay, one thing you'll notice is that it'll tell you what version you're running and it will check for the latest version. If you're not on the latest version, it will give you it will tell you that you're not on the latest version and it will give you a link to download the most recent version of the tool. So what you'll do in that case when you download the most recent version is you will find where you stored it in your directory and you'll go get rid of the file that's there and you'll replace it with this new file. And then when you open the tool again using that same path, it will access the new version. So just one thing to note there. You can also, there's also commands to check for updates. But before we get into any more specific commands, I'm going to show you what I think is arguably the most important command in the CLI, and that is the help command. So if you just type help in the CLI, it will give you a list of all of the other commands that are available. This tool is iterated on pretty rapidly by our labs group, and they're always adding new things in order to enhance it and make it better. They're always adding, new information about the different commands and things. But this gives you a basic concept of the of all of the items that are available within the CLI, all the things that you can do. If you're wondering if you can do something in a CLI, I usually just hit help and then I will use a find command to just see like what can I do with a data set, and it'll start highlighting for you as you page down what different things you can do with the data set, or maybe try a few different permutations of the type of item that you're trying, or the type of command you might be trying to do. So how do you get more information about one of these specific commands, how to use it? So one thing to do is we do have help documentation. It's linked here. It says documentation is available at the Domo Help Center. So it's linked from where you download the CLI. You can also get to it by searching for command line interface or CLI in the knowledge base. And it gives you a pretty good overview of some of the basics of what you might want to do in the tool, the usage of some of the commands, but it's not exhaustive. I have personally found that the best place to get information about how to do things in the CLI is within the tool itself. It is self-documented. So, for example, let's say that I want to learn about updating a data set or uploading a data set. So I will type help and upload data set. And that will give me information about how to use this command. It will give me, maybe a blurb about what you're doing there or why. It will give you examples of how to use the command with different flags. Anything that is within these very technical term of like Pac-Man brackets or whatever, anything that's within there is a variable, or it is something that you will provide, like a file name or an ID. And then the usage here tells you what it's looking for with those various flags. So that is the very beginning, opening the tool in the command line, using the help command, navigating your way around it just a little bit there. The first thing that you're going to need to do, though, if you're working in the CLI and you want to be able to work within your instance, is you need to authenticate to your instance. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how this works, and then in just a moment, I'm going to have Eddie kill my screen so that I can log in. Not quite yet. I will let him know. But basically, we will need to authenticate to an instance. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you what information there is within the connect command. So connect, very straightforward, connects to a Domo server, which is your Domo instance or domain name. So you can do it two different ways. You can either connect to your domain using an access token, which I'll show you how to get in a second, or you can do it using a username and password. And it gives you some various options down here that you can use as alternate flags. So when you're looking for a token to use, for an access token, this is the token that you create when you go into the authentication section of your admin section. Under this access tokens, you would hit this generate access token here. You would describe what it's for, assign it to whoever is going to be using it, so probably yourself, and then set when it should expire, anywhere up to 10 years. And then you push generate. I'm not going to do this because it would create an actual token that you'd be able to see. But when you hit generate, it will display a token for you. You copy that token out and save it because you won't see it again. You have to keep it somewhere that you will be able to reference it, and maybe in a password protected file on your computer or something like that, because that is a one-time viewable token, a way to access the instance without using a user ID and password. So basically, I have over in this cheater help screen over here. Don't pay attention to the wizard behind the screen. You guys don't want to see me, typing out exhaustively how to, or all of the commands. So I have some to copy and paste here as we're working. But basically, if I wanted to connect to my sandbox here, um, I would enter connect -s. I would enter this server, which is my sandbox, and then I would enter the token. Um, Eddie, can you kill my screen for just a second so I can authenticate?
Your screen has been killed.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Just let me know when you're ready. Lots of folks joining us on these Domo Lunch and Learns. Fantastic to see you, Daniel, our friend Jim. Seems like a lot of folks are not familiar or haven't used this yet. So we're really excited to have them join us. Just let me know when you're ready to.
Amazing. Yeah, you can restart it. So what I did here while I was off screen is I put in the token in that place where the X was in the command, and then I hit enter. It authenticated me. It confirmed that it knew who I was as a user, and then I just entered the help command to fill the screen with this help list so that nobody could see the token. So you'll notice here the last item here in the list, who am I? This will tell me who I'm currently logged in as. This is useful if you have multiple instances that you're trying to manage from the CLI. You can see who you are or which instance you're logged into. So basically, this is showing me who I am logged into this current instance and my ID of who I am in that instance. All right. So we're authenticated. We know how to access the CLI. We know how to see the list of commands. What are we going to do now? I'm going to show you just a very few basic commands and things that you can do in the CLI. We can talk about some more complex ones, but for the purposes of this lunch and learn today, we're just going to go through a very few basic ones. So what kinds of things can you do in the CLI? Like all the things. You can do a lot of things in the CLI. What I'm going to show you today specifically, I'm going to show you how to export data sets. I'm going to show you how to upload data and create a data set within the instance. Um, I think I'm also going to show you how to do a little bit of user management stuff. But this is just a very short list of just in 10 seconds off the top of my head, rattling off a few things that I know you can do in the CLI. So the answer is, what kinds of things you can do, pretty much, anything that you can see in the list of commands, which encompasses a lot of things within your instance. So the balance we're going to mostly spend in the CLI doing some of these things. And I'll jump into the instance periodically to show you how things are looking from the instance side as we're doing things in the CLI. So first off, the first thing that I want to show you is how to export a data set. So I've loaded here just this test data into my instance. I'm just accessing it from this link that I pre-saved. I just have this example sales data here in my instance. So say I want to export that data, but I don't want to do it from the interface. I don't want to use the export data command. So the way to do that is using the export data um, command here. So let's look at the information it gives us when we choose to look at the help. So it tells us it exports it to a CSV file. What it needs you to give it once you're authenticated is the dataset ID and then the name of the file of where you want to save the data. So in my case, I want to so I'm just going to take this and copy it so you don't have to watch me fiddle with the writing. But basically, I'm going to say I'm going to export data from this dataset ID. In case you're not sure, you can find the dataset ID of a dataset here in the URL. It's this number that is after the data sources portion of the URL. So you just copy that. So that's my dataset ID, and I'm telling it I want to put my file on my desktop and I want to call it exportfile.csv. So when I hit enter here, the CLI will download this file to my desktop. All right, and it was very quick because it was only 20,000 rows. It confirms for me that it was exported to this location. So if we go look at my desktop, let's look at my desktop here, you'll see here export file. That's the file that I just barely created. It's a CSV, and it has all of the data that existed at the Domo instance level. Um, obviously at this small of a scale and at this manual of a process, there's not a lot of sense to using the CLI to do this rather than just using the interface. However, when you get into maybe larger data volumes, or you need to be able to schedule something to regularly export, or um, the kind of the sky's the limit as far as what you need to do if you need to put it into a different system or whatever. The CLI can be really handy in that case. So I've exported that data, but how do I import data? So the
Hey,
first,
Andrea. Sorry, before you move on, I always hate cutting people off, but I want to make sure that some of these questions do get answered before we get too deep into the weeds. And that felt like a nice transition. So we had a question come in from YouTube, and this may just be something specific to the person trying to do it. So I don't want to put you on the spot. If we don't know the answer, we can follow up later if we know who this person is with. But they said they were unable to run the Domo UTIL jar file from the CLI. They get a message saying something about being connected to the internet. Is that anything you're familiar with?
hmm, that's interesting. That's not an error that I've come across when trying to run that file.
Okay. If it's Danu, sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. Please put in the comment section where you're from, and we'll try to get somebody connected with you to help you out with this at a later date.
Yeah,
Andrea likes to connect with folks outside of this as well. So
yeah, for sure.
definitely want to make sure you're supported. So stick around. Apologies that you're running into that. And if it's not something Andrea has seen, we'll definitely have to deep dive into it. So thanks, Andrea. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it might be something. I don't know if your company has limited uh, your ability to run an outside file. Like I'm not sure. So yeah, we'll have to dive into that a little bit deeper. So, okay, so you've exported data. How do you import data? So the first thing that you need to do, or the first thing, basically, I would create a data set. So unless you're loading data to a data set that already exists, which you definitely can do, if you need to create and load data, the first thing you need to do is create a data set. So let's look at the parameters needed to create a data set. So this is the basic string that you would enter in order to create the data set. You need to name the data set. You need to specify what the data set type is. Generally, CSV is the data set type. You can enter an optional data set description. That's the information that shows up. Um, let's see. That's the information that shows up here. Like I entered here, CLI demo file. So you can enter that, that's optional. And then you need to choose a schema file, or you need to set the schema. This is a pain though to try to enter. So you need to choose a schema file that has the schema. Now you might be asking, what is a schema file? If you've been working with data for a long time, the schema is basically information about the structure of the data set, specifically the names of the columns, the data types within the columns, and then if there happens to be an upsert key set, that's kind of next level stuff. We're not going to worry about the upsert key, but basically you need to be able to tell your data set um, what the kind of columns they're going to be and what their column names are. An easy way to get a schema file is to derive it from your existing file that you're going to use to upload the data. So I have this file conveniently on my desktop that I downloaded here, this export one. So I'm going just for purposes of demonstration, I'm going to derive the schema of this file in order to create my schema file. Um, so let's look at this command. There's a command to derive the schema. It's just derive dash schema. And it is looking for you to give it a data file. You can also give it a row limit so that it doesn't try to read all of the rows. It defaults to 1,000. So in order to get my schema here, I am going to reference this export file that's on my desktop, and I'm going to say that I want it to save the schema file to a file on my desktop called schema file so that it exists. So I hit that. It doesn't give me any message, but I know it completed because I got no error. If I look on my desktop here, now I have this file called schema file, and it's a JSON file that gives you, let's look at it here, a JSON file that gives you the columns and the column types and things of what existed within the file that you derived the schema from. So you have your schema file, and now you can create your data set on Domo. So we had looked at this create data set, so we can give it a name, we can give it a type, we can give it a description, and now we have a schema file to feed it. So I'm just going to use this. You don't have to watch me type. Okay, so I'm saying create data set. I'm going to name it CLI demo test. The type is CSV, and I'm referencing the schema file that lives on my desktop. When I hit enter, this is going to create a data set on Domo. Because I have not loaded any data to it, it will be empty. It'll just be like a blank container that has the columns and the schema set up in order to be ready to receive the data. So when I hit enter, it takes me through, it tells me what it's doing, and then it gives me the dataset ID of the dataset it created. So I'm going to copy this because I want to go visit that dataset and see it here. Oh, there it is. So it's called CLI demo test. It has 0 columns, 0 rows. You can't see anything when you go to the data set because nothing's been loaded. It's just an empty container that has the right parameter set to be able to load data to it. So next, I need to be able to load the data. So I'm going to use the file that I have on my desktop to load that data. I obviously would not in the real world export data and then reload it right back to Domo, but for purposes of this, let's first look at the upload dataset command though. So this is one of the more robust commands, and it's pretty well documented. Within this command, you need to be able to choose the dataset ID and the file name at bare minimum. You need to tell it where the data is that you need to load and where to put it. There's also a couple different flags that are very commonly used. One of them is this -H, which I'm going to be using in my case, which tells you that the data file has a header row. There's also -A, which appends the data to the existing data set. If you don't specify -A, it will replace what's in the existing data set. And then there's -P, which you can use to assign a partition to this block of data. Those are all very common things to use as part of your uploading of data. We're not going to mess with the partitions today. That's for another day. But basically, I'm going to take this command and I'm going to say, okay, I need to upload to this new data set that I just created that's all empty and blank. And the data that I want is this data that I have saved on my desktop. And I've chosen -H because my data does have headers. I don't want it to ingest the header row as a row of data. So when I hit enter, it will take me through this process of telling me it's executing a post, um, and it'll tell me when it's indexing, etc. Here we got our final message returned. It's finished its indexing with status success. That means if I go back to my data, it should, yep, and there it is, it's uploaded. So 5 columns, data type of a CSV, and 19,000 rows. And it's here within my data set in Domo. Ta-da! So that's kind of the basics here. Um, I don't know if we have another couple minutes here, but another thing that you can do in the CLI is you can do some user management. So one thing you might want to do is get a list of the users that exist in your instance. So if I say help get user, you can get information about a user by email or by ID. You can also just use the a flag to get a list of all of your users and all of their information. So that's what I'm going to do in my use here. So I'm going to say I want to get, oh, that had an enter in it already. I'm going to say I want to get users, all of them, and I want to put them in a file on my desktop. So the user list got saved to my desktop. So now when I go into my desktop and I open my user list, it gives me kind of this ugly block, but you can parse it out, that gives me the IDs, email addresses, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, of all of the users that are in my instance. Um, there are a number of reasons why you might want to do that. One reason might be to get a list of users because you want to assign them to different groups or something. So one command, yeah, that's right, add user to group. You can identify a group, identify a list of users, and through the command line, you can assign those users to a group. So in my use case, I've taken a random group ID, I've assigned a random user to it. Oh, and I got an error because I have already assigned that user to the group.
I'll get another question here. Are there any data volume limitations, Andrea, when exporting and importing?
Yeah, so if you're using the query data, so there's a command, I think it's that. Yeah, if you're using this query data command where you're querying a data set and getting data back out, it is 1 million is the limit. Um, and so if you need to be able to run a series of queries or if you need to be able to run a query that's greater than, that will turn more than 1 million, you'll want to do a series of these queries. As far as the export data, you should be able to just get uh, whatever you're exporting out. It might take a while, and it obviously is limited by your storage space on the computer that you're exporting to. Once I accidentally exported a data set that was enormous and it filled up all of my available space. It was such a newbie moment. I can't even tell you. But yeah, so basically, yes, there's no limit with export, but there is a limit with the query data.
Awesome.
And as far as loading to the platform, one of the big use cases for the CLI is if you need to be able to load a really large data set. So you'll notice if you try to go to one of our connectors to load data through the CSV connector or the file upload connector, you'll get capped out or it'll time out or it'll give you an error that you're not able to upload a data set of that size. You can definitely do that through the CLI.
Awesome.
Yeah, and that's kind of all I had today as far as hands-on demo. So any other questions, happy to answer them. Um, you can also hit me up as always at andrea.henderson@domo.com. So feel free to hit me up if you have questions.
Absolutely. And then, Andrea, you said that there was going to be some resources, correct?
Yeah, so I'm going to take the commands that we walked through today, and as well as the sample file, and we're going to put them up on our GitHub, and we will be able to link those from the community post.
That's
So I
awesome.
think Eddie dropped the community post in the chat, and you should be able to access those things from there.
Yeah, so we've got the link there in the chat. So if you're watching this, whether it be on demand or live, check out that community post in a few days. As soon as it's up on GitHub, we'll just refresh that. I'll make a community announcement so they can see it on the community as well to make sure that's there. Folks that have been watching, we had a lot of comments at the beginning, so I'd be interested to hear your take. Andrea obviously would love the feedback as well. A lot of folks said, I was very scared or I've never touched this. How are we feeling now? Let us know in the comments and chat section, those folks that have been watching with us for the last 35 minutes. Tell Andrea how you're feeling. Do you feel great? Are you more comfortable in using this tool? I know she would definitely love to hear that as well. So we'd love to hear it at the end of the session. Andrea, thank you so much. As always, a crowd favorite here on the Domo Lunch and Learns. Really excited to continue to provide these. Here you go. Our friend Daniel has popped in and said, looks good, very useful. Can't wait for him to dive in. Any API demos in the next couple of days? We hope to provide those as much as we can. Our friend Michelle, thanks, Andrea. I love to see more use cases. Lunch and Learns every Tuesday and Thursday. Check out all of these fantastic things that we're trying to provide in the Domo community. Make sure you're paying attention to the events page as we post these, not only there, but on our YouTube channel. Thank you so much again, Andrea. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. As always, we will catch you on the next one. Appreciate everyone stopping by. Jim, we agree. Not nearly as bad as we once feared. That's why
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, just a final reminder here, this meme, the CLI is only intimidating if you think it is.
Absolutely. All right, guys, we'll catch you on the next one. Thanks for joining us.